Hello everybody, my name is KARIEM. Welcome to The Spot. My co-host DAMION WARE.
What's up everybody?
Dame, we got a big show today, one of the most, in my opinion, significant programs that we've had up to this point. We got our guest here, Dr. Kwodwo Williams II. He's an accomplished African-centered community psychologist. What is a psychologist? What does a psychologist do? Real quick before we get into it.
Well, you know, there's a lot of different variations of practice that you can get into as a psychologist. You can actually assess, where you do a lot of different assessments, where you attempt to gain an individual's aptitude in different areas, whether it's cognitive, behavioral, etc. I am a community-based African-centered psychologist, so I tend to look at large community issues, and I come up with dynamic psychological constructs that help to alleviate those issues.
Okay, so you're working right now at the Minority Behavioral Health Group. That's an acronym?
It is.
What kind of work y'all doing over there?
So Minority Behavioral Health is the premier culturally based mental health agency in the country right now. We practice something that is very unique. We practice an African-centered paradigm. The idea is that psychology has been blanketed across all cultural groups for years in different practices. And what we recognize though is that every cultural group have a different worldview. And when you force a cultural group to assimilate their worldview, right, into mainstream culture, they have reduced coping skills. Their psychology becomes tampered with. And they have a higher degree to not be as resilient as they would be otherwise.
They're almost walking in the footsteps of somebody else, almost playing a role.
That's exactly right.
Appreciate you, first of all. Short notice. You know, I think that this is a prime time for us to be dealing with this topic. We're dealing with Black mental health here. And I think it's prime time because we've had a lot going on, particularly here in the city of Akron. And I think that this is an episode that would really help a lot of people and start the ball moving on people really opening the door and putting mental health at the forefront of something that we actually put even on our plate. I don't even think a lot of us have it on our plate as something that's a viable thing that we should be getting involved with. You got a motto that says, never underestimate the power of an interaction. Tell us about that.
Well, the idea of that we are all interconnected, and that every time we interface with each other, we leave a little bit of residue behind, right? And so it's important that when you're interacting with people, you do it with a high level of intent and you make it purposeful. Because you never know what residue you might pick up or leave behind.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you guys, basically, you're kind of just leading the charge, taking psychology into the urban Black and brown communities, per se.
So underserved populations, right? When you look at African Americans, when they're primarily served by white institutions or white practitioners, they have a higher tendency to be overly pathologized, right? Where they have these extreme diagnoses. Schizophrenia is a very common misdiagnosis for African Americans. Or they have a higher termination of services without things being really resolved. They just won't show back up. They also have a higher tendency to be over-medicated. And so this is all because of the cultural biases as it relates to psychology of individuals of African descent, and not really understanding the dynamics of our worldview and the complexities of our worldview.
Okay, so when you say pathologize, you're talking about the origin or the circumstances that created the mental state at the time? What is
Well, when I say pathologize, I'm talking about diagnoses,
Okay.
right? And how individuals are identified as relates to categorized into that DSM-5, as well as an inability to look at the cultural life circumstances that lead to our unique personality traits and our unique way of managing our personal psychology, as well as our collective psychology.
So, in terms of like what they would consider like mental disorders and them diagnosing us, can these be emotional or behavioral situations that have gone long overdue or unaddressed, and then be considered something that's like a disorder as far as like schizophrenia or something? So basically, a child grows up in a certain environment and they deal with certain traumas or certain behaviors that they learn, and then you deal with certain levels of anger and certain emotions. Do that eventually trigger like a chemical imbalance and being a disorder, or?
Well, there's a lot of different theories as it relates to all diagnoses and disorders. But what is most important to recognize or to understand, though, is everybody carries some form of psychological tendencies, right? Everybody has anxiety. Everybody has a form of depression. It's just when these things get to be so severe that they inhibit you from functioning in your day-to-day, right? Okay. Now we're dealing with a psychological concern, right?
Okay. So very little space in our culture. You know, the culture is thick. Everybody, we got all kinds of things when we talk about the culture. We have all kinds of things that we embrace, our swag, our clothing, the way we dress, and music, and that type of thing. But it seems like it's very little room in the culture for healthy conversations about mental health. Why is this? Why is it so difficult for us as a culture to have these type of conversations?
Well, I think it's important to use both our historical reference of what it is to be Africans in America, right, as well as our modern day reference. When we look at it from a historical perspective, we've experienced a lot as a people, right? And we've gotten through a lot as a people. I always say that our ancestors did more with less, right? And one of the things that they did more with was they exercised their spirituality, right? And so that became a very strong coping mechanism for us as we were one of the most oppressed groups of people on the planet. But as we begin to assimilate into mainstream culture, we begin to denounce some of our values and our beliefs. And so therefore we begin to lose our coping skills and coping mechanisms. Then when you look at modern times, when you start looking at what our children do, right? When they are, how engaged they are on social media, and they're not absorbing our values and beliefs because the parents aren't interacting with them as readily as well as and passing these values on. And so you end up with individuals with a challenge in their own internal locus of control and being bombarded by external forces, and then we end up with psychological concerns across the cultural group. And it's not just African Americans; it's across all populations. But you know, they say if America catches a cold, then African Americans are going to have the flu, right? And it has a tendency to affect us more readily.
When you talk about that in terms of speaking in regards to our history, is there like a long-term or other long-term effects for living in like, are there long-term effects for us living in like a flight or fight, kind of like a survival mode?
Yeah. I mean, now we're talking like phenotype, genotype, right? And so we inherit a lot of the anxiety that through our DNA, through our parents, right? That's why African Americans suffer through hypertension and different medical illnesses on a more consistent basis. It's based on our environmental circumstances. We carry a higher level of stress right? I always think it's interesting. African Americans are some of the most in tune people that you ever want to bump into. If somebody walks into a room, everybody head is snap up. They're paying attention.
Absolutely.
Right? And everybody's doing an inventory every few minutes. And that's our attention. That's our anxiety that we're kind of instinctual we carry collectively. We were like the antelopes on the Serengeti.
Yeah.
Something moved, we like, whoa, what's
Pick
that?
it up.
Yeah, we pick up on it really quickly.
What I get a lot is the way that we assign. It's a weakness. It seems like it's interpreted because as much as is not a space in the culture for this conversation, it's even less of a space among Black men. Black men in particular, it's like we're not really trying to have that conversation at all. And I think that we're super critical of one another, particularly when it comes to weakness. And that nobody wants that label of being mentally weak or not being able to shoulder a problem or whatever. So how do you see that?
So right now I'm doing I have a major campaign where I'm working with majority African American males in our community through reentry, and you know I think it's a misnomer that African American men don't participate in mental health. It just so often that circumstances have to be an extreme before they do participate. But when they do participate, they participate readily. They're very vocal. You hear all the different research say that they don't speak. They don't have a good descriptive language. They don't discuss their psychological concerns. But I find that they really do.
Like who's doing the research? Who's interpreting the experience?
Exactly.
Does that have anything to do with the way the statistics are? Because we almost communicate differently. There's certain things that I can look at in a Black man and he, I'm going to read in his whole communication, as opposed to just verbally what he's saying or not.
That's right. That's called paralanguage, right? And we have a different paralanguage. Our tone, our projection. We can change a word just by our tone. I can say, "Oh, that's cool." Or I can say, "And that's cool." And that already spins that word into a different context. And so as a practitioner that's not experienced working with African American groups or other cultural groups, you're missing a ton of information and interaction. And so African American men we don't use a real big descriptive language. We use what we call a high context language, where we use few words to describe a tremendous number of complexities in a different dialogue. And so when you're sitting down with maybe one of a European practitioner or a white practitioner, they're looking for all of those low contexts where they use a lot of words to describe something. And so they miss a lot, or they might say that African American men don't talk under those circumstances.
We just don't say as much. When you talk about descriptive language, describe that a little bit.
So again, our language has a lot of different layers to it. Again, we have tones, we have pitches. We also use a level of slang that when you combine it with different tones and pitches, the language spins into have different meanings.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
So if I say I'm mad at you, right?
Right.
That's very different when I say, yeah, I was mad at you.
Right.
And that one right there lets you know it's in past tense.
Yeah, I'm good now.
More relaxed now.
Right.
I don't own it. It's not at the forefront of our interaction. But the other one might speak a little bit more volume. But so individuals that again don't have the experience in working with African American community miss all of these dynamics.
And that's what I wanted to pinpoint, why I wanted you to describe the descriptive language, because when you talk about tone and pitch, in these incidents that we see going on in America where, say for instance, you have police or safety officials engaging African Americans, are they misinterpreting that most of the time? And is that what escalates?
Well, let me say this, and I don't want to generalize, but one of the things I do know is their training is based on assuming authority. And we already know how we experience authority as African Americans, especially African American men, especially if it's a push towards authority that we feel that we don't deserve. So when we get pulled over, we tend not to like the way police assert their authority. Right. We want them to be a service provider. We want them to talk to us as kindly as we would speak to them, of course, under the circumstances. So I think that spins a lot of things out of proportion as it relates to the police interaction and African Americans in general.
Okay, so how does the whole thing of mental health just deal with the way that we even communicate? Because that right there could be part of the communication. I think I seen it once that they said anger is the go-to emotion as a reaction for depression. That's how it manifests itself in a lot of ways. So like, what is the different ways that there's a crisis type situation occurring when we're dealing with mental health? How does a person recognize that?
Well, when you start thinking about crises, right? There's a crisis is someone's exposure to a traumatic event, right? A traumatic event, or it could be a developmental crisis where we're moving through different developmental stages. Every time we go through a different developmental stage, we are in some form of crisis because we have to adapt to that particular stage. But when it's important to understand that when individuals are in crises, that you want to give them an opportunity to express the emotions that the crises cause. And if they don't get a chance to have that deep level of expression, then they start leaning on what you refer to, those default emotions. Anger, aggression, right? Because it's easier to display those type of emotions than it is to display fear, a level of humility, being humiliated, and because those emotions are not only are they more complicated, they don't have a big place in the African American community, right?
Right.
If I told you that I had an experience and I was humiliated today, that'll be a difficult conversation for us to have because that's not even a term that pops up in our language on a consistent basis.
But you're saying it's important to allow people to experience that.
Yeah.
Okay, so a person experiences that, and then how do you walk them through? Are you talking about being, you almost need somebody that's skilled in the art of letting them experience that and then bringing them down, right?
Well, not really, because African Americans actually, we have instinctual coping skills. Our culture, the way it's built, we have in it built-in psychotherapy, right? And we still carry it on when we use the barbershop, for example. And brothers come in and have some dynamic conversations. That's a collective idea that in our culture, historically through storytelling and etc., we are expressing the full range of our psychology in these dialogues. And when the individuals start telling the story, now you're not isolated in that experience. You say, oh, I'm not the only one who have these experiences and feel these emotions. And it's isolation that causes individuals to really panic as it relates to psychological experiences. Their inability to relate it to somebody else through expression or to see other people or other different ways individuals are actually coping with those different experiences.
Is there more of a need for like peer groups or more peer groups in terms of, coming up from a child on up to, adult males, or just peer groups, period? Is there more need for that?
Well, there is a big need for it. We are very social people. And so when we start seeing our community shrink based on limited socialization,
it really puts us into a very interesting position as a collective group of people. And I'm talking about social media, right? Where individuals are more exposed to people, but are more isolated than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about conversations like this where we're sitting down face to face and dialoguing, where most people are now on Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
and it limits a whole range of discussion, and it acts as a barrier to real life experiences and real life socialization. So there is a big need for it. There's a big need for especially individuals of the African American community to have contact socialization.
Okay.
Wow. So, and I want to go back to what you talked about isolation, because the way that I understand it, the way I experience it, it appears that there's a different type of communication of how we process data. When there's a circumstance that comes up, I got a problem, I got to deal with it. Generally, men process information internally. It appears that we're not the type to just go around talking about a problem, trying to work ourselves through it. It's typically, women that might be a little bit more external in their process as it relates to solving problems. So men in general, if we're more internal in our processing, and just how we process information and data to solve a problem, don't that kind of lend to isolation? Because the isolation is kind of what's dangerous, right?
Well, yes, the isolation is dangerous, and you're right. Men communicate a little differently as it relates to psychological concerns or just problems in general. But we still speak to one another, right? And we still interact with each other. It might be a smaller group, right? It might be one or two significant people in your life, but rarely is it no one, right? And if these two people can hold your information and keep it safe, as well as give you constructive dialogue to connect with it, and they might even have an opportunity to advise you that this is large enough that you need to pursue a professional, right? Because I'm watching you, brother. I'm watching you every day, and I see that this thing is really somehow interfering with your day-to-day activities, and that is weighing you down.
Wow.
And so, it goes back to those personal interactions.
I'll tell you what, man, we're gonna take a quick break, knock out this quick commercial with our sponsor, Upper Room Apparel. And but when we come back, man, I want to really talk, because we've had, just preparing for this conversation, naturally in the barbershop, we'll toss around different ideas and everything, just bringing up the subject throughout the course of the week. And man, the thing that blew my mind the most was that every time we brought this conversation up, there had to be 2 to 3 people in the shop at the time that was dealing with a crisis related to this in real time. Like they was really dealing with it right now. So when we come back, we want to kind of really deal with, when you talked about a person observing and saying, okay, I see what you're going through. Give us an idea of what that looks like. What are some of the things that we can kind of pay attention to and look out for? What does it mean when we see generally, it might not be 1, 2, or 3 things, but when I see all of these things present at the same time, what does that mean? We'll go into that a little bit once we get back. We'll be back in a second.
The perfect balance of streetwear and luxury proves we're just built different. The brand's DNA celebrates who we are, and is unapologetic in our cultural evolution. It's fueled by the aspirational motto and brand mantra, the upper room, where great minds meet. Walk with me. Let's bring together every hood and every city, every borough. Real is rare and it's that upper room apparel. Meaning of the minds and it ain't nothing but love. Great minds think alike, 2 brains better than one. You got my back, I got your front. Forever solid, it's in us we trust. Might not come overnight, before you walk, you crawl. United we stand, divided we fall. United we stand, divided we fall. United we stand, divided we fall.
All right, we back at the spot. Doc, I tell you what, man. Tell us. We was talking about before the break. Mental cues or recognizing cues. What are some of the things that we look for people around us, people in our environment, to say, okay, this person might be going through a crisis?
So, mental cues are more difficult to observe than others, right? Because we all have a tendency to be able to mask some of our concerns. They're far easier to observe in and of yourself. If you are losing sleep, right? If you have a hard time focusing on your day-to-day activities, if you're being pulled away from thought into your traumatic experience or into issues or concerns without actually sitting down and having a structured thought yourself, right? If you're just distracted by that particular topic, if you are experiencing high levels of anxiety, when you encounter different situations that normally you would be able to cope with, but you might be a little bit more anxious, you might be a little bit more irritable, you might have a little less patience, and etc. And so when we are socializing with each other, we also kind of recognize this amongst the people that we're socializing with. And you come into the shop and you look in a certain way and it's not your normal appearance, then everybody's gonna look and say, hey, what's going on with Kareem today, right?
Yeah.
And they might make some assumptions. They might make some assumptions that you didn't get any sleep. They might make some assumptions that today he's not as talkative. There's some things going on. And we all, again, have these experiences, but when you see them on a prolonged period of time, then you might be recognizing that someone is dealing with a severe or a potentially high-level mental health concern.
Are we missing some of those cues? I know you spoke about being oversensitized or desensitized. In our community, are we missing a lot of those cues, be it due to the tendency for people to mask it with overabundant drug or alcohol abuse? Also, sometimes we grow up with people and we think that it's normal. We mistake tough for you got some problems. You know what I mean? Or we mistake certain ways that people act out as something that's kind of normal because we're used to seeing these type of individuals in our community. Can you speak? Are we missing some cues due to?
Well, I think as a collective culture or a community as a whole, we just have different way of manifesting our cues. They don't look the same as they do for other populations, right? Our cues look a little bit different, and so we're not missing them. You know when somebody off their wobble, right? You know when somebody a little bit off, and you're gonna step a little bit away from them. You're gonna go, oh, he's not registering everything. And again, we are very communicable people, so we have high tendencies to recognize when individuals are experiencing challenges in their interactions, especially in the African American community.
Okay.
And individuals, they say it, right? They say it. If no one's just going out and committing suicide, they're yelling it at some point. At some point they're yelling it at the top of their lungs.
Wow. And we was talking to a guy just the other day. He had made a statement that I thought was interesting. He was talking about how he didn't feel like at this stage of his life he was where he needed to be. And I asked him, well, what is the measuring stick that you're using to determine whether you're ahead or whether you're behind? What's the measuring stick? And everything that he referenced was something that he's seen on social media.
Interesting.
And I said to myself, okay, so to me, in my opinion, social media kind of is the lie. It's an opportunity where everybody get to play make-believe, and for the most part, and project the image that they're really they would rather be, as opposed to an image of who they are. And people believe the lie and then measure themselves against the lie. how do you think that social media or the excess of social media is affecting us in our?
Well, social media has known for some time their effects on mental health in across the globe and the planet. And you described it very accurately, that it is a false projection, right, of a level of perfection, a level of flawlessness that none of us are able to actually obtain in our human understanding of ourselves. We are all human. We all come with flaws. We all come with things that we would prefer not to have, right? We lose our temper. We're not always dressed to the nine. We're not always as articulate as we would like to be in those staged formats of social media. And so when individuals begin to accept those projections, and now I'm talking about interjection, when we begin to start believing that those are things that we have to hold ourselves to, then we're holding ourselves to rigid standards. And ultimately, those standards are going to become crumbling down, right? They cannot be sustained on a consistent basis.
Right, long term.
Stress. So that speaks to like not being able to. You got the social media epidemic situation going on. The stress of not being able to take time off and not be human or not be normal. Like how is that affected?
Well, I had this conversation with my financial advisor the other day. Me and him was sitting up there talking, and we were talking about retirement. And he was talking about how now with AI is so critical that it forces us to work all the time, right? Because it's holding us to different standards, and it's pushing us. It'll nudge you and say, hey, you need to do a report on that, or you need to look at that data a little bit more critically, right? And if you don't respond to it, then AI will do the work itself because you didn't respond in a timely fashion. And so I'm reminded of in the early 80s when I was one of the only African Americans in my high school taking a computer course, and the instructor came in and said, this is going to be a great course. It's going to help you all out in your future. You all are going to be the generation that never has to work. What a lie, right? As we walk around with our digital phones, which are computers, I can send emails, I can send texts, I can do reports, I can draft information, we are working all the time, and there's very few cutoff switches unless you consciously learn how to cut them off. I was thinking about some young adults who have children. As a therapist, they talk about their children, and I always give them a recommendation. I say, no child needs a cell phone between those most developmental years, between the ages of 8 and 11 for females, and possibly 10 to 12 to 13 years of age for males. These are some very developmental years. But if you draw them away from learning from us as parents and as family supports, and put them in the hands of the global population, right, through social media, you're asking for a major mental health concern because they don't have what it takes to get through this next transitional stage.
That's interesting, because now to me that kind of says, okay, what's the family structure, and the lack of family structure. We was talking about it the other day, in that even the term baby's mama and baby's daddy takes you out of the human family's categories of father, mother, cousin. These are things that kind of fit you into a family structure where people can get perspective. You using terms like baby mama, baby daddy, it's almost like you move out of the human family from a categoric standpoint. But the lack or the breakdown of the family, we're not going to talk about why it happened or none of that. We're saying, okay, here's the present condition. How do we function as a community or as a family from this point being as disjointed, how do we keep that from turning into traumatic situations and scenarios or experiences for children?
Well, I think
That type of
I think it's important. I think it's important that we first understand that as individuals of African descent, we have an immediate family, but we also have an extended family, right, into our community. We have been raised by many fathers in our community,
Absolutely.
right, and many mothers in our community. I think that where we are now is an interesting place because now we won't raise each other's children. We again, it moves us towards a little more isolation, where we can see a kid doing something inappropriate, and we wouldn't dare tell them that it's inappropriate, although we know by every standard of what it is to be human that is inappropriate. But we also know that if we address them, even if we do it in the most kindest of fashions, there might be another adult nearby that's their parent who might say that's not your right or that's not your place. So we're losing this kind of idea of community.
Wow.
And it's disheartening. It's disheartening that we no longer can participate in the development, the psychological development of our community readily.
Do you think that is because we don't understand the benefits of it? We don't, why is it that a person would, you have a situation to where sometimes we'll look at people in the community and say, you know what, I don't think that person is psychologically equipped to discipline my child. And then you have the protector thing. A lot of us, we've adopted a way of raising our children that we went through so much trauma as a child growing up. We want to save them from, I'm not going to raise my children the way that I was raised. And so that type of thing. So when you look at other people, when you look at that collective, that community collective, and then giving them license to, express any type of authority over your child, you almost have to consider, whereas it used to be a given that everybody had some type of sense to themselves as the way in they was rational. But now when you look at people and they're so irrational, irresponsible, you almost say, okay, why would I give that person the authority to govern my child in my absence?
Well, I agree. I agree that that's where we are. But the reality is, if I was doing something inappropriate, if the community drunk Grady saw me doing it and he said stop doing it, I was going to stop doing it. Right? If he said, I'm going to tell your daddy when I see him, it was the end result. The end result is the behavior needs to stop, right? Because either that child's not going to be safe or the community is not going to be safe somehow. And so it really didn't matter who asserted their authority, as long as the behavior was stopped. Miss Maddie Bell might come out and whoop you with a switch, right? And then she'll call your mom.
And then you get another one when you get home.
Well, but those are some old kind of community management styles, and now in light of where we are and what's politically correct with my air quotes, right? It's important to understand that you still have the ability to engage them, but you have to have a little bit more tact, right? Because they don't have to receive it. Good communication is me expressing something to you and you receiving it, right?
Right.
And if I express it in a way that you don't receive it, then the communication wasn't successful.
Right.
Absolutely. You talk about you kind of touched on it before, intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
Explain to us, because every time I hear that phrase, I'm hearing it in reference to things that happened to us during slavery and how we're still suffering from ramifications of what we went through slavery. And I think that when people hear that, it almost delegitimizes the whole concept for them. Explain to us how that works.
Well, it definitely has a historical reference, right, all the way back to slavery. But you can come up to modern day references. When we talk about intergenerational trauma, we're not only talking about the trauma that we were exposed to, meaning our grandparents and these people that we have talked to, and they've expressed how the water hoses were poured on them, right? And we also see it in our history when we look at documentaries and we look at civil rights and et cetera. And we're a people who relate as a cultural group. We are a collective people, right? I'm reminded of when the DC sniper came out, we all lost our breath.
Right. We ain't
Because he
serial
looked
killers.
like
Yeah.
that speaks to that speaks to how communal we are, right? When we see someone in our community suffering, we experience that suffering, right? The same way that we experience some shame and embarrassment when we saw a member of our community committing such atrocities, right? And so that's a generational piece.
Wow.
And we experience that on a daily basis. So when a police pulls us over and he's being overly assertive, he's dealing with a historical trauma, right? And anything can happen under these circumstances because he's triggering intergenerational experiences.
Wow. That's kind of heavy.
It's not just a moment.
Right.
He's dealing with a lot of post experiences.
And so with us seeing this on the mainstream, because people tend to, when it goes to the news or whatever have you, they tend to say, oh, why did he respond like this? Or why did he run? This is post, or, this goes back, right?
Yeah.
From what we've seen. And are those like traumatic experiences?
Post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Right?
It is.
Intergenerational post-traumatic
Yeah.
stress. We're sympathizers to people who might go to war from a present day and come back and have PTSD. But if you're talking about something that's kind of coded into your DNA,
Come on, you already know.
that's something that, man, you can't. It's hard to shake that.
Yeah.
You gotta have sympathy for it. So
Well, you can't shake it, right? Every time we see an officer pull someone over, we automatically imagine, what would I do if that was me?
Right.
And we're running these narratives through our head over and over again because that individual looks like me. He's driving a car like I drive, and I've had the experience of police talking to me as if I'm a child, right?
yeah.
And so all these narratives and these historical references all come into play
Right.
at any given moment.
Right. That's what I'm asking.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. I had a conversation one time in the shop and we was talking about differences in cultures and our experiences. And I was saying, you have situations, I said, now look at this. I modeled it. I said, okay, you have every black person in the room can relate to this. And I sat there, I said, you're sitting there, you're driving down the street, and then you do this. I said, what does that mean? And every black person in the room said, you was driving down the street, you passed the police officer, and you was looking to see whether he got it back of you after you got there.
That's right.
I said, wow, that's so crazy how something like that communication is all across the board, where everybody, you just can't get away from it. It's part of our experience.
That's right.
And it's part of our trauma. The way that you kind of explained that to me is like, that's a traumatic thing that makes you do that.
Oh yeah.
You're triggering something that's traumatic.
Take your pulse after seeing those bubblegum flashers. I
Wow.
don't care if it's a ambulance. I don't care what type of emergency vehicle, even if it's a fire truck.
Wow.
We all snap into a level of anxiety instantly when we see it, right? Until we can make sense of it. And even after making sense of it, we still pull over to the side. And when the police pass us, because they really weren't after us, they were just heading to an event, we have to woosah. We have to figure out how we're gonna relax. So we're walking with these stressors on a much more consistent basis than a lot of populations.
Okay. So mental stress, black male mental health. Can we talk about the mental health of black men without first talking about the mental health of black fathers?
Interesting. I don't think you can separate the two. I think it's important to keep them interconnected. Black males are raised by black fathers, right? And so it's important to understand that you need a healthy father to have a healthy son. And so our African American male community is dependent, like most communities, on who's doing the educating, who's teaching certain coping skills, who's teaching how to be resilient, because life is going to have its challenges, and you're going to have to be able to manage them and continue to cope. Who's getting the worldview across that it's not about how soon you accomplish something, but well done is soon enough, right? And changing the spin of it, that it's not what you're supposed to do by the age of 21. It's how well you're supposed to do it, right? And so I don't think you can disconnect the two. Black fathers and black men are eternally interconnected.
We were having a conversation with Tara Mosley, running for mayor, and she was talking about how her zip code in her ward, 44306, had the highest rate of black male suicides than anywhere in the county. I was looking up some stuff, and they said that suicide is the third leading cause of death for black men ages 13 to 25. Is that, you talking about a final stage of a mental breakdown?
Well, when you start looking at the ideas of suicide, one of the things that is important to understand is that individuals start having not only a sense of hopelessness, but they also are experiencing isolation, right? When you combine that idea of being in a hopeless position and also being isolated, then you are inside of your own mind, right? And you might be dispensable to yourself, right? But it's not until you hear someone else say that they care or they express a different idea of how you can cope that it might pull you into another or project you into another direction as it relates to suicide. African American men are extremely isolated, on top of being extremely burdened by societal expectations and societal treatment.
Now, explain that. Burdened by societal treatment?
Yeah. So when I say societal treatment, undereducated, right? Right? When we're talking about, what we're really discussing is all the disparities, right?
Okay.
Undereducation, parental rights, right? The father has no parental rights at the birth of their child,
Right.
Which is amazing to me,
Right.
Which is amazing to me. And we have the expectation to be a good father, but all the systems are designed, even from birth, right, to not promote the father's relationship with the child. Mother's babies, father's maybe, right?
Yeah. I know in Michigan, when we grew up, they had to where if you were getting social service, you couldn't get social service if the father stayed in the home.
Yeah.
Now, this was the trick that I thought was just totally crazy. There could be a male staying in the home. He just couldn't be the biological father of the children.
Interesting.
So to me, that was almost like a systematic way of breaking up families, causing conflict in the home. And people just need a way to be able to help us understand what we're seeing. We have these experiences and have no clue as to how they are manifesting themselves or what role they play in the person that we are today. We almost kind of knock it off, brush it off, keep it moving. And we don't really understand one stage before we go to the next stage.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a strong psychology is one ability to be able to master different stages of development. Mm-hmm. And when we don't master a stage of development, and we have to go into from childhood to adolescence, right? We have fewer coping skills. Okay. We have fewer tools to be successful. It's like failing third grade math, and then being put into the sixth grade math class. You're going to have deficits because you didn't master certain things. And everyone has to master certain things at different developmental stages. And that's why I say, hey, our young kids don't need social media. They got things they have to master so that they can be strong enough to withstand the projection of social media. But if they're being raised in it all of their lives, we are now raising them to be a externally sensitive individual, more concerned about their extended self identity, meaning what they look like to others, than they are about their own internal identity.
Speaking of child development, how hard is it for people in your line of work to I'll say infiltrate and get into the school system and the education system? Are those political barriers? Because I noticed in reading something, it's based on state and district. How hard is it for you to get into?
Well, the mental health has changed dramatically as it relates to the services. Mental health used to be individuals will come and speak to you directly. Now we have some very open designs. For example, Minority Behavioral Health have therapists throughout Akron Public Schools. We also have case managers throughout Akron Public Schools. Case managers play an essential role in mental health now because we recognize that if we can't alleviate individuals' social barriers, they can't deal with their mental health, right? And this is a very common phenomenon for the African American community. If you don't have a case manager that's helping you get your basic needs met, then we can't even begin to talk about your symptoms of depression, anxiety, or et cetera.
Seeking help. About 4% is what I read. 4% of mental health workers across the country are African American. Is it important for a black person to have somebody that they can talk to that looks like them, that have their same experience, that type of thing?
Man, that is tremendously important. It's tremendously important. I can't even explain to the extent to which it is. The idea of sitting across from someone who knows your life experiences based on them having those same experiences, the idea of being able to have someone empathize with you from a genuine perspective, right? Versus that blank perspective of all you're doing is speaking to me, and at the end of this session, you're going to go your way and I'm going to go mine.
Wow.
When working with a African American therapist, it's a symbiotic relationship. The client is giving to the therapist as much as the therapist is giving to the client.
Right.
In many instances, I always say that every rhino has a bird, and sometimes I don't know if I'm the rhino or the bird when I'm interacting with my client. Right. The bird picks the parasites off the rhino so that the rhino will stay healthy, and the rhino provides the bird with nourishment. And again, these dynamics really switch back and forth as it relates to the interaction between a African American therapist and another African American.
That's powerful. And what about gender? How does gender play a role in that? Is it important?
It is important. We have a tremendous number of young ladies that don't have male influence, right? And so I have some of my strongest clients are African American females, and looking just for the male side of the perspective of the psychology of it, right? Okay. Looking for the male's perspective of what it is to be a female, right? And the same way we need females' perspectives of what it is to be a male.
Right.
And so genders according to issues. Some things are perfect for female-female
Right.
interaction,
Yeah.
but some things are also equally as perfect for male-female interaction.
I was just about to say that. So, as we close, man, what is give us an idea of, you know, why people should look to say, okay, this is something I should entertain. This is something that I might want to toss my ball into the ring and start getting at least talking to somebody. Why should we be open to that?
Well, I think we should be open to it because we no longer have all of the supports that we used to have, and so with us moving to small family units, meaning only functioning inside of our families, and our families even becoming smaller, we're not as connected as we used to be, and so it's extremely important to reach out if you need assistance to not only your support, and as it relates to your family support, but maybe to a professional, maybe to someone that's willing to sit with you and help you process the complexities of what it is to be under a challenge or to be overwhelmed or not fully understanding what direction to go in.
Okay. Dame, you got anything that you
No.
want to finish up with?
I'm good, man. It was good talking to you today.
Great conversation, man. If you can, you want to tell some people, tell everybody about how, in the event that somebody is open and wants to kind of take another step towards just having a conversation, how would they get in contact with you? Would they come through your organization? Give us some information.
Yes. So Minority Behavioral Health Group, right? On Copley Road, 1293 Copley Road. You can contact them through their direct line, 330-374-1199. Request an intake package. You can even be really specific about requesting if you want a male or a female therapist. We are a institution that is small in nature, but with great big hearts, and we oftentimes we have waiting lists. So it's important that you're patient, and it's even important that you express what some of your issues are so we can prioritize you, right? We don't want somebody calling in and they having suicide ideations and unbeknownst to us, we place them on a waiting list. We know that these individuals have to be moved to the forefront of the service delivery system. So again, just reach out and we will follow through diligently.
Group services, do you guys do that type of thing as well?
We do. We have group services as well. We have some dynamic groups. We have infant mortality groups, right? Which I think are some of our strongest groups. But we also have multiple prevention programs. These prevention programs are really dynamic. They are designed to promote a level of skill development before the problem arises, right? So it's speaking to our youth about how to respond to conflict. It's speaking to our youth about how to cope when they become anxious, and it's giving them skills that allow them to ward off some of society's pressures as a whole. So
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. We appreciate you coming by, Dr. Curtis Kwodwo Williams II. Appreciate your time.
I appreciate y'all having me.
We'll see y'all next time at the spot.